I remember that I did an article on this several years ago. And so I'm going to put a link in there for everybody. I have a website. I need to update it. I haven't done anything probably in 2 or 3 years. It's called the Garden Steward. And on there, right now there's let me go there real quick. There's a resource tab. When I did it, if you purchase something from the resource, I got a little bit of a commission. That's no longer. It's just there. I don't get anything for it. If a link is dead, just let me know. But there's a book list. If you really want to learn gardening and become more proficient, it's a complete list. It's for the novice gardener, the more advanced. There's seed catalogs if you want to know, well, where can I get good seeds? Because this is one of the things we'll be talking about. And I mentioned a lot. I like Johnny Seeds. I like Roar Seeds. I'm looking at the site right now under the seed catalog. High Mountain Organic Seeds. These are places that many people, including myself, have vetted where you can get pure seed. You know, if it's organic, non-GMO, you're really going to get that there. And, you know, I indicate pretty much where they are and whether I've purchased from them. So those are seed catalogs. Third one, a YouTube channel I started. I need to get back on that. But in the middle of the page, thegardensteward.com, you'll see beginnings. Has some good information in there. And the one I'm particularly pointing you to is the second newsletter called Starting Points. And it has a lot of the information I covered last week. It'll have a lot of the information that I'll cover today. So I just wanted to point that out. But as Chris mentioned, you want to start with an end result in mind. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to supplement your table? Are you trying to grow, especially in a time like this when you really want to grow as much as you can? One of the things that I mentioned is to everybody is keep a food journal. Now, why a food journal? A food journal, in this, again, remember, if you miss anything, just go to thegardensteward.com, click on newsletter number 2, Starting Points, and it has this information in there for you. But the food journal, I like to tell people to do that because it gives you an idea of what you eat. It'll also give you an idea of what your family likes. With gardening, sometimes you can plant things that you're going to end up hating. I always encourage people, plant something. If you hear about it, you've never tried it, plant just a little bit, not a lot, and try it because you may be pleasantly surprised. One of the things I planted that I never thought I would like was pak choi, I don't know, 10 years ago. Galena just said, yuck, she doesn't like it, but I love pak choi. It's very nutritious. It's really good, and it's very versatile. You can eat it raw, you can cook it. Susan, I'm sure, could tell you information, you know, about pak choi. There's bok choy, pak choi. It's the same thing, just depends on which company you're in, what seed variety, but they're pretty much all the same thing. There's a third one in there, but I can't think of it at the you know, at the moment. But try something every now and then. So the purpose of the food journal is it lets you know what it lets you know the amount that you're consuming, first of all. So let's say you want to not buy any tomatoes. I like tomatoes because most people like them. You can't go wrong, and that's something that everybody wants to know. So let's say you don't want to buy any tomatoes at all this summer. So you say, okay, how many tomatoes is my family eating? You journal that, and that'll give you an idea so that when you're ready to start planting, you have a starting point. You know, I need this many pounds of tomatoes every week. So once you have that food journal, you know the types of food you like, you know what you want to grow, then you kind of determine the area. At 10 by 10, you can grow a lot. At 20 by 20, you don't have, everybody thinks, you know, that you have to go out and get a tractor. And that's no offense to everybody. If you want a tractor, one of your neighbors may have one. Go and ask your neighbor, you know, hey, come and till up my lawn. That'll save you $20,000, $30,000 depending on the size tractor you're getting. And ask your neighbor to do it, or somebody has a tiller, go and borrow it. Use whatever you have as a starting point. The next thing after you do your journal, and again, this is all in that newsletter, there's something called economy of scale. And what do I mean by economy of scale? Now, I tell people, sorry, again, using tomatoes, you know, modern agriculture says go big, get larger and larger, but you really want to be planning. So let's say in your food diary, you know how many tomatoes you want, and you need to figure out what what is my garden going to yield? So let's say you want 500 pounds of tomatoes. Of that 500 pounds of tomatoes, you want to eat, let's use easy numbers, 200 pounds of tomatoes and can 300 pounds. So you know that you need a good enough area to give you enough tomatoes for that yield. So a tomato plant typically will yield about 5 pounds per square foot. So with 5 pounds per square foot, then it's pretty easy. You need 100 square feet of space to do 500 pounds of tomatoes if you're just going to grow only tomatoes. However, I tell people, be wise. Don't utilize all that real estate for one crop. So 100 square feet, what is that? 10 by 10? My math, am I thinking right? So a 10 by 10, but that's a lot of square footage to use up just for tomatoes. So I tell people to do successive gardening. So what do I mean by that? So for this month, you dedicate a portion to tomatoes, then you dedicate another portion to something else, another portion to something else, and another portion to something else. And then what you do with these tomatoes is when one plant dies, you plant another one, so that throughout the entire growing season, you're producing tomatoes, so that at the end of the season, you will have produced 500 pounds of tomatoes. So that is a little bit more, that's better planning than to plant that whole 10 by 10 plot in tomatoes, because you can't do anything else. So just dedicate a certain portion and just keep successive planting. Successive means as soon as a plant dies, you stick another tomato plant in there. And that way you can have a couple of varieties. Let's say you want only 150 pounds of Better Boy or Bush Boy, something like that. Once you get your 150 pounds out, you can go ahead. They may still be producing, but pull those plants out, and you want the rest of the season to do a good canning tomato would be, I'm sorry? Somebody say something? Okay. Aroma. A good growing tomato is aroma. So you pull the Bush Boys or the Better Boys out, and then you just do the rest of the season in aromas. And then along with that, you have several areas that you're growing other things, so that whole 10 by 10 space is not just used up for tomatoes. So you'll get your 500 pounds just in that, short real estate. Does that make sense to everybody? I just want to make sure, was any of that not clear?
So it sounds like you have to do a little bit of pre-planning, and there's some information that'd probably be good to know. How long will a tomato plant last, and when should I not plant anymore? But I'm sure those things can be found out on the internet somewhere.
Correct. You can Google it. The internet is an amazing tool. Back in the day, many of us were having to memorize some of this stuff. Now you can just get online and just Google it, and it'll tell you how long it takes for a tomato to produce. Like if you plant tomatoes here in May, which I would encourage you to do, early May, you're going to start harvesting tomatoes sometime in June, late June at that. Your harvest really is going to really come in July. So you need to know how long it's going to take for that to yield. Correct.
So I'm not going to be planting tomatoes now, and there's some things I would plant now, and then there's some things I plant maybe June, July. So should I, on our gardens, should I plan out the entire growing season and where I'm going to plant what, and then I'll just leave that spot available until it's time then to plant tomatoes or whatever?
So
or you use your space more efficiently and you grow something until May, and then it's done, and then you start planting tomatoes at that time.
That's correct. So I'm looking for that as I'm we'll keep talking, but I'm looking for something as we're talking about that. I keep a spreadsheet, and in that spreadsheet, it lets me know. Oh goodness, where did I put that? It'll come to me. It lets me know how long from seed to yield. Once that starts, producing, I need to know how much time I have. So with a tomato, you don't want to plant a tomato in June. Honestly, if you do, you're not going to get a tomato until towards the end of August. And then your growing season is short. So if you really want to do tomatoes, yeah, you can plant them now, but you'd probably have to baby them in case there's a freeze or something. Make sure you're covering them. But you normally, generally speaking, I'll do my tomatoes because I had a greenhouse. I used to plant them in February inside, and then I would transfer them outside in end of April, beginning of May. So now is a good time to start doing your tomatoes, your bell peppers, your summer products, and like your winter squashes. Winter squash will take until fall. So if you plant them in May, you're not going to have a winter squash until August, September, October, depending on the variety. What you don't want to do is plant peas, broccoli, cauliflower. You don't have enough cold season left in the year. And your cold crops, like cold weather. So it's a little bit late, for doing that. Now is the time that you're harvesting that kind of stuff. But now you're prepping your garden for your summer and your winter squashes. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. Okay. So that did. So before we get into the rows and all those things, what kind of things should we be thinking of planting now? What would be what would be a way to find out that information of what we should do? Because when you look at planting charts, they vary and they have windows. And I mean, what would be some just general stuff that people plant? They should be thinking, oh, should do this. And what would be some things that you would want to maybe get something to transplant rather than do seeds?
I would encourage everybody to start experimenting with seed planting. I think, down the road, think about right now, what you could and you couldn't buy. Even the seed companies were actually running short because there was an increase in people ordering seeds. So, seeds is something you want to make sure, just because you're doing summer planting now, those seeds probably should have been bought in December. Just giving you something, to think about and planting. And I want to encourage you, you don't have to start big. You could start with 1, 2, 3 seeds, whatever it is. Pick something that you really want to grow. Some plants are more expensive. Some once they've already grown. But right now, if you can get plants, I say start with whatever you have. If you have the experience with seeding, it's a little bit late to be starting, but you could actually start. You could do some. You can do some. It's just going to push your season out a little bit later. But it's better to do something than not just do anything. So in about a month or two, depending on the variety, you can actually start seeding. Like July 1st, I'll tell you, July 1st, I will start seeding my broccoli, cauliflower, mid to end July. And because I know that's a fall crop, that's a spring crop or a fall crop because it likes the cooler hours. So mid to late July, I'm putting in my seeds for broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Swiss chard, all all the cold crops, cabbage, peas as well for a late fall crop, stuff like that. Now you can do tomato plants, any of the peppers, any of the squash, zucchini, eggplant, any summer, any summer crop.
So how about corn, onions, and carrots?
Carrots is a winter crop. It's extremely difficult to grow carrots in this area in the summer. You can do it more so up in the fall. There is a variety that's it came out last year. I've heard good things about it. I've never tried it personally, but it was co-developed with, I believe, the University of Georgia. And it's not it's more of a hybrid, not a, it's non-GMO, but it's more of a hybrid. And supposedly that's a variety. I can find out the name for you if you really want it. But I do my carrots in the winter. Carrots like a little bit of cold. It's the cold that releases the sugars in a carrot. And that's one of the reasons carrots don't work so well down here. They bolt quicker, they're skinnier, and it's a more pungent, almost like a spicy flavor. You can get away with doing summer carrots up north, but not so well in the south. So carrots, I would start. You can't transplant them. You want to do seeds,
Seeds,
and
yeah.
so you would do them. I usually do them about August, because I want them to be a certain height before the frost comes in, because with the neat thing about carrots is you can overwinter them, and you can literally go out in your garden and harvest carrots all winter long. If you're concerned there's a frost coming, sometimes I've gone out and just put 4, 6, 8 inches of hay on top of it. But my carrots are already established. You don't want to do that before it's established. So you definitely want to plant them in August. The hay creates an insulation of heat, and you can also put like a sheet over it as well. Put some cups down or something, paint cans, something that will hold the sheet off. You have those plants. You don't want the plants to be crushed, so you put something under to prop it up. Yeah, you can make bracing to do it. Pipe. I've done it with PVC. I've done it with electrical piping, water pipe, whatever you have, and make like an arch.
So is there a chart somewhere that you would recommend that would be regional to our area, specific for our area, that would give guidance on this? Seems like you just kind of know it, but for others, is there a place that we could go to find that?
So there's a few years ago, I went and I looked at theirs, and I thought they had a pretty good one at not Eastridge, I'm sorry, Ottawa Nursery. They used to have a pretty good one. You can contact the local extension office, which every county has one, and they can get, you can also find them online. I haven't looked one up in a long time. Or any nursery, any well-established nursery, local nursery. And I say try to go with like the local extension office or a local nursery, only because they're going to have better information, because they're growing it. Someone up in Michigan who's putting out something for down here, they're going by theory, but down here these guys have actually tried. They kind of know what works and what doesn't. So
Okay.
yeah.
I think so. Tara asked about onions. Is that a winter crop as well?
My onions were planted in, hey Galena, when did we plant those onions? I was a little bit late this year. Was it February? Because of the rain, we were really late. We had like one day, I can't remember, I think it was was it March? It was the end of February, I think. Onions like to start off in cooler weather, or onions are kind of finicky. They like to either start with cool weather and end with warm, or they like to start with warm and end with cool. The cool, similar to carrots, is what helps with those sugars, and it'll give you kind of a sweeter onion. You can do a summer onion, but it's going to be a little bit more pungent, a little stronger flavor. And in this area, especially, one of the things that if you really want sweet onions, anybody who has a fireplace. If you don't have a fireplace, go to your neighbor, find somebody, and get ashes and put on the area that you're growing onions. Do not put calcium. Onions, the sulfur, calcium has sulfur in it, and sulfur is what gives you that spicy onion and a spicy garlic. If you want a sweeter onion, like the Vidalia, the reason Vidalia, Georgia onions are so sweet, they're really high in potassium, and you get potassium from ashes, or they add it to the soil. They actually put a compound in the soil down in Vidalia to strip it of sulfur, so that the pungency is less, and they add, potassium to the soil. So any place that you're planting onions, garlic, even carrots, you don't want high amounts of sulfur in there. So you don't want to plant things that are going to be high in sulfur. What you can do is actually plant things that will pull sulfur out of that area, like a heavy sulfur feeder, and I can't think offhand what one of those would be. And strip the sulfur, and then spread your ashes on there. About 5 pounds per, I don't know, 20 square feet. So yeah.
Now, would you do soil testing to determine whether there was a need or not, or is that something you would just do?
I would do a soil test, obviously, because I want to know what's in that area and what's not. And if it's high in potassium, obviously I don't want to be dumping potassium in there, because too much potassium will make the soil neutral. The other thing about the ashes is you want to make sure you don't dump too much, because if you do, it's going to neutralize, kind of sterilize the soil, any chemical that you put on there, and then you won't be able to grow in it. So yes, it is a good idea to have a soil test to see kind of what's in there. I still would add a little bit. If I had high amounts of potassium, I still, just because I've been doing it so long, I still, depending on where that number is, may add a little bit, but I would have to look at that myself personally.
Okay. Well, let's shift into the garden itself. So let's just say we've turned it over, and now you showed a really neat picture of your garden and your garden rows. How do you keep your rows straight? They look pretty straight. You get string out and pull lines.
Okay. So I'm going to answer that question, but I want to share something. I'm going to do a multiple. I'm going to come back around to that.
Okay.
So this is my, you guys could probably see this, like Brussels sprouts. I'm very detailed as far as what I do, but I knew I planted a variety called Churchill. I got my seeds from Johnny Seed. I have the product code. You guys don't have to, copy this verbatim. Do what works for you. But because I was doing, production growing, I wanted to know so that the next year I could know exactly, what I did. Soil pH, when I started off, I used to keep that. That just, I'll jump down to cabbage. For example, cabbage likes a soil 6.0 to 7.5. I got to the point where I knew that a lot of this stuff. So I would put stuff in there if it was a little bit different than what I was used to. Like kale can be grown anywhere from 5.0 to 7.0. And so I would keep the soil pH that they liked it. Where this comes in good is if you have multiple plots. And let's say you want to keep the area with a higher pH. Then if you look at this, you say, okay, I don't want this in that area, and you want to keep an area that's a lower pH. That's, that's good for you. Seed date, this is when I started my seeds. Actually, let me go down here to my radish. So my seed date was February 8th. And I know that, on March 4th, I could transplant that. So in here, I had formulas that would tell me, how long, or sometimes it'll say it on the packet. For example, if you buy a packet of radishes and it says, sometimes it'll put on there transplant date or harvest date. So because when you're doing a lot of stuff, when you're doing thousands of seeds, you want to kind of keep track of everything so that you know when you can manage it and move it. I also indicated which field I had it in, because I had multiple fields, how many numbers of bed, the row, because some of my rows were 50 feet, some were 100 feet, some were almost 200 feet. I had different rows that I was working with. So this is one that I'm not sure why that's not done, but yeah. Sorry, I know I'm clicking through here. And like I kept something like this as well, for my fields. And I would say, okay, this year I did strawberries here in bed 1. Bed 2, I did bell peppers. Bed 3, I did tomatoes. And the reason I did that is I wanted to know, sometimes like tomatoes, for example, are high nitrogen feeders. It will strip the soil of nitrogen. So if I follow a tomato bed with something like a Daikon radish, which Susan may know, or any radish, radishes are nitrogen feeders, meaning they will actually put nitrogen into the soil. So here I have tomatoes which pull nitrogen, so I could follow those with something like a heavy nitrogen pusher, which is a radish, which actually puts nitrogen into the soil. You guys don't have to be that complicated. I'm just kind of giving you an idea of, how complicated I was all my
Oh,
different
that's nice.
fields, and
Hmm.
my greenhouse, my shed, and um, and then I had a rotation. I kept something like in the winter, spring, summer, fall, and then I would also keep notes. I added mulch, what minerals I would add, whether I did my green were cover crops. What I'd plant a grass. Sometimes I wanted just to build that field, that row, and I would plant like a cover crop in there for that season. Just let it grow, and then the next year just till that in, and that would build my microorganisms and would also build up the nutrients in that area.
So let me ask you a question about your rows. You've got your rows long ways. If you have a longer field, is there an advantage to going long ways rather than perpendicular to the length of the field, shorter rows?
I've done that. I've done both. You kind of experiment with those to see what works best for you. I've done longer rows. Just try to be consistent. For example, I mentioned that you guys buy plastic. Sometimes I will have half of a growing area covered, and what I want to make sure is if it's this direction, it's 20 feet. This direction, it's 33 feet. I need to be consistent so that if I cut that plastic in strips, which I sometimes will do, I just go and I know it's the right size, and I just cover it up. At the end of the season, I fold them because that plastic will last a long time. So I kind of determine whatever I go with, I stick with. So if it's a 33 feet that you want, stick with it. If it's a 20 feet that you want, like an area that's 20 by 33, or if it's 20 by 20, that's easy. And you can change it. If it's 20 by 20 or 10 by 10, you can change it. I've done that.
Mhm.
It's just a
Okay.
preference.
Now, when you take your row that's 30 inches wide and you go down and you plant different things in that 30 inches, and it looked like your rows were higher than your footpath. Is that because the footpath was packed down, or is that because you built up your 30-inch row?
Okay, yes. So I was going to, I'll share that as well. I'll talk a little bit about that. So when we started, this area in here, this was actually, I'm trying to remember, this area was
Wow, that's quite a hill.
24 by 178. This slope used to go, I planted on this one year, and it was very fertile soil, but it was about a 33-degree gradient or slope, and it washed away. We had a monsoon that year, and it just washed away. So the next year, I had to rebuild that whole area, and after it washed away again, I said, okay, we have to do something. Brought in some big equipment, and I had terrace 1, and then down here you can kind of see it, terrace 2. And this one, yeah, this one was, I think, 24, it's been a while, 24 by 178. So I took my tractor, this was hard pan. This was extremely hard. You can kind of see in here. And so what I did was I took my tractor and I tilled this all up, but then it rained and it beat it up again. So I wanted 30 inches. And so here's my broad fork. I put this in there, and these rows were 100. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. And 30 inches by 100 feet. And I took this broad fork and just one by one went all the way down and dug these out. I wanted to know, what I did was I measured all of this out. I determined how many 30-inch beds I could get in there, which was 5. I could have gotten 6, but my walkways would have been too narrow. So I determined what size I wanted my walkways, and that left me with 5 rows. These are not made yet. You can kind of see them sort of. And what I did, this here is peat moss. This is native soil. I made my own soil, so I have my peat moss in there to give me organic matter. I also brought in, I think I told you, I brought in 22 yards of worm castings, and I put that in there. I added sand to that area. I also added chicken manure because this was dead soil. This was nothing. I did the soil test, and it was depleted in everything. So, we were out there. There's my tribe helping me. And with the tractor, we were just bringing in the mulch. We were basically going down it. They were they were adding, and also they're breaking up. Actually, what these guys are doing, they each have their own individual holes, and they're breaking up clumps of dirt, and I'm adding amendments to it. That was it before we started. Sorry, I'll come back to that. Here's what it looked like afterwards. I also did a road grow tunnel over it, but this is the soil here.
Wow.
Here's my worm castings, and here's my my beds after I was done. And so yeah, we're Gideon and I are putting up, and some of the things that we were able to grow in there. Here's the other end of it. This was the following year. You can see growth has already started. It had been uncovered. We had a lot of rain. I wanted to prep it, so I covered this whole area was covered. And so what I did was I left this area here covered. We uncovered this area, made the beds as you see. This would have been next. And this is the picture you were asking about, Chris. So when you work your soil basically and you use the broad fork, it kind of lifts it up. You want your soil aerated. Aerated soil is going to be higher and elevated and lighter than, this is compacted. These are my paths. So it pretty much maintains that throughout the growing season. And you can see, I like to keep my areas elevated. I will actually take the soil out of my rows. I'm sorry, out of my walkway to put into my rows to just keep that up, because it also helps with drainage. So if we get a lot of rain, the water's going to stay in here, rather than flood my crops.
Okay.
So, and this area I was mentioning, this was 50 this direction, 50 by, if I remember correctly, 33. And in this area I have red lettuce, green lettuce. These are beets. These are also beets. I had 4 different varieties of beets. This is a fall crop. So this is in the fall. I knew I couldn't plant any summer produce in there. I have broccoli. I have cauliflower. I have some Swiss chard in there and some kale. And I mean, thousands of plants in here. So that's what I'm saying. This is just a 33 by 50. And I have, thousands of plants in here.
I can see that in Sotero's yard. Sotero, you got plenty of yard.
I've got plenty, but I don't have the will to do that.
So Daniel, a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
When you water this, is it better to water in the morning, afternoon, or evening, like with mildew and things like that? Is there a certain time that's better to water? And the second question, I'll let you flow into it, is dealing with weeds. What's the approach here? Do you recommend using like newspapers or straw, or or is there a certain timing to it? You mentioned a timing the other day, so you could kind of touch on those 2 things: watering and weeds.
So with watering, I've experimented with watering, and I always tell people whatever's the easiest, honestly.
Okay.
I know people that they will get out and they will measure the soil moisture and determine when it's best. I know people who water by the moon. I know people who water in the mornings. And what I learned is I was growing and I watered whenever I could, because I had 7 different fields. I was doing thousands of plants, and it took me hours. Like this area had this 33 by 50 would take me a couple hours to water this. And so and you guys know the Georgia climate. And so because I needed to get water on these things, I would water this for 2-3 hours, depending. Sometimes it would take 4 hours for me to get enough water in here, because I know if I didn't get enough in here in 2 days, this would be a desert. So I would basically water, didn't matter what time of day. I would start it, and then as soon as this was done, I would move it to the next area and water. So I was watering throughout the entire day. I never had issue with mold or rot. I was pretty active in my garden. If there was, I would have addressed it right away. You can easily remedy that with a hoe, and I'll come back to that when I talk about weeding. But honestly, if you water whenever you can. If you're a morning person, you think watering in the morning is better for you, go for it. If you're afternoon, you know, evening, I've done all of it. I never had issues. I've also done some drip irrigation. Drip irrigation can potentially cause more mold and mildewing problems than like I just used a simple sprinkler, or Home Depot sprinkler, because it's covered my entire 50 50 by 33 area, because I wanted to do it in one pass. I didn't want to have to go back and water this multiple times. So I would get them that they threw it wide enough coverage to try to do one area. That 100 by 30, I mean that 24 by 100, I had to do that in 4 passes. So like I said, I was watering all day. I would start in the morning and I didn't stop until basically I was getting ready to come in and go to bed. And I never had a mold or mildew issue. I did, and with the only place I had that with was when I did drip irrigation. But I think with drip irrigation, it tends to make you a little bit more lazy. My theory is if you're not as lazy, maybe if you keep on it like I did with an area like this, you probably won't get it, but I think you're a little bit more susceptible. But I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying it's all in maintenance. A garden, most people think, okay, I can plant it and just water it and leave it. It's not going to work. If you leave it, you can have weeds, you can have mold, mildew, all kinds of different things. As far as weeds go, I have a different approach than many, and a lot of my friends also. I like weeds. I don't have a problem with weeds. You know, I tell people weeds are like sin. You can't get rid of sin. And it's a constant reminder to me. I think it's a neat thing, especially if you have children. It's a wonderful object lesson, because sin is always there. And you can always, every day, the Bible tells, you know, you work out your own salvation. And when you're constantly working out these weeds, and I really often would think about it, you're constantly working out, you know, those weeds. It reminds you to, you know, what have I done today? Lord, if I come to you, am I working out, you know, the sins of my own heart? I'm dealing with the sins in my garden. Now let me deal with the sins of my heart. So that's the first thing. I really don't mind weeds, and I think we should keep them there because it's that. The second thing is that I like weeds. There are very, very many reasons. Weeds tell a story. I remember when I lived in Atlanta, everybody was out there and they were putting, you know, different things to get rid of the dandelions. I was bringing in company. I brought in a company one time to just kill the dandelions out in my yard. And, you know, they're putting these harsh chemicals on there. Dandelions tell a story. Dandelions will let you know that your soil is calcium deficient. When I learned that, it totally changed things for me. So anywhere you see a dandelion growing in your yard, that's it. That's an indication that you have a calcium deficiency. That means you need to go and get some lime. So if there's a dandelion growing in my garden area, it's telling me that I am calcium deficient. So dandelions are a fascinating plant because a dandelion root will burrow up to 8 feet deep. And they're little miners. They're mining all of that calcium that's way down up to the surface of the area. What's fascinating about a dandelion is when that dandelion plant dies in that spot, if they've mined enough calcium up to the surface, it will a dandelion plant will not grow in the same spot. It may grow next to it, which is calcium deficient, but it won't grow where it just mined all that calcium. So dandelions are really good story. Weeds tell you a story. Burdock root, it means you have a calcium and iron deficiency. And so the burdock is mining iron from deep down in that soil and also calcium. Once you address, you know, the iron or the calcium issue, the deficiency, you won't have the issue. So, you know, people want to say, well, what do I do to kill that? What do I do to get rid of it? Let it tell you what it's telling you. What's that story? That way, once you do your soil test, going forward, you get to know your garden and you'll get to know what it'll tell you really what it needs. I think that's neat that even though the devil throws these weeds at us, God allows them to give us that story.
That's fascinating.
yeah, what is needed. So
Daniel, I'm gonna have to. I'm supposed to be in another meeting at 1:45, so I gotta jump off. But I'm gonna let you guys go ahead and continue, answer any questions you've got, and wrap things up when you're done. So I'm recording this right now, and we can post this online whenever it gets done. So,
okay.
but thanks. I'm gonna step out, but I'll let you keep rolling with things, and people can ask you questions however it sorts out.
Okay.
All right, thanks.
You're welcome. As far as weeding, I talked a little bit about that last week. And with weeding, what you want to do is, I mentioned, get a hoe that you like. Try different ones. Don't just buy one. Go in there, no matter how strange they look, you know, determine which hoe is going to work best for you. And once you plant your, let me see if I have a picture in here. Sorry, I threw a bunch of, those were from my garden. These were all my, you know, thousands and thousands of seeds to be transplanted. So once we planted these in an area, what we would do is we would wait two weeks. And in a 2-week time frame, all the weeds in that area are going to start growing. And what you do is you get your favorite hoe, you go out in the garden, get some exercise, and you take that hoe and you hoe everywhere up and down that row around these, you know, your starts. And then you wait another 2 weeks and you do the same thing, and then another 2 weeks you do a third one. And if you do that, it is drastically going to decrease the issues that you have with your weeds. Because weeds, something is wanting to grow in that area, and until your plants are tall enough to shade out, you know, everything that's in there. Let me see, sorry. I'm looking, where is it? So in here, I actually, down here, I have some onions, and up here I did a cover crop. And what Eliana is doing is she's watering this. Underneath this covering, I had PVC pipe. This was for my winter growing. And this is a, oh, what is that called? It's not plastic, it's breathable. Because I didn't want heat in there. What I wanted to do, I wanted heat, but I didn't want to cook it, because these were a cold crop. I didn't want the heat to be too high to hurt my spinach, my kale, my broccoli. So you want a breathable material, and that's what's, you know, covering those. And I just stuck some rebar in the ground. I bent my PVC pipe and rebar on the other side, stuck it in on the other end, and I covered it, you know, with my roll cover material. That was a poor man's way of doing it. I have since stopped using PVC. I tell people if that's all you have, use it. If not, but if you have options, don't use it. One of the things that I noticed with the PVC is the chemicals deteriorated my covering. And so I went to metal pipes, which I had to bend myself. These were nice because they were flexible and they were easy to store straight. With metal, you know, it's a little bit more complicated. You have to have the space. But I have since moved away from PVC. But I tell you, people, use it if it's all you have. Here, of course, you see I went with a larger one. Excuse me, and I'm using metal. But I'm looking for a specific plant. I can't find it. Where is, oh, this. So these guys here, what we would do is we would go and we would take our hoe, and we would hoe in between these. Now they're planted pretty close, and I did that intentionally, because the closer you plant them, the bigger they get. That means they'll shade out the smaller weeds and kill them. So you don't have to do as much weeding. And you'll notice if you see a lot of, you know, farmlands, people tend to grow things a little bit closer, and it acts more of as a you know, it'll shade out all the weeds to keep them from getting sunlight and help kill them. So that's one thing you can do, is find out how close you can plant something. The other thing is, like I said, plant them open where you can get that hoe in. I did kind of a hybrid thing here. This area was so poor, the soil was horrible, and that summer was so dry, I wanted to keep some moisture in there. So after I planted everything, I covered it in pine straw. This is pine straw, all up and down here. And the reason I did it was kind of as a weed suppression, and also to keep moisture in there. I bought a truckload of that stuff. I've also done it with, all the grass that you guys mow. If you bag your grass, and I do that actually still to this day. I will bag my grass and I will put it around here. It's just I didn't have enough grass in this area to do all of my beds. And so that's why I had to get something else. And I would use kind of a combination of wheat straw, pine straw, wheat straw in the winter time because it doesn't grow, pine straw in the summer because I didn't want all the wheat turning in, growing seeds. And putting seeds in there and giving me weeds. But grass works really well, and that's my preferred method if you have enough of it. Any questions on the weeding? Okay. Okay, well, I think I've covered everything that I was asked. That's an area that this was up here was my terrace number 1. Down here, this is terrace number 2. And we had worked on this. I planted, I think these are cucumbers. I planted, I don't know, 1,300 cucumber plants, I think it was, in this row. And then another 3,000 up here. And you can see this area, the soil was so bad, it maintained water. I would have a swamp. One year I wanted to get rid of the water. It was just raining. I planted rice. I actually started growing rice in this area. And it started growing, but then the water, it stopped raining and the area dried up, and I didn't want to irrigate it to keep the rice growing because I had a well pump. And the summer had been so dry that the water table was getting low. But that was a neat experiment. I planted rice in there to help get rid of some of this water. It's too bad I wasn't able to get a crop from it, but yeah. Okay, guys, I think I'll open this up to questions. Anybody have any questions? No questions?
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
What do you think about the, have you heard of Back to Eden gardening?
I have. I'm not a fan.
You're not a fan?
No. Several of the, so I am friends with just about all of the best known Adventist farmers out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I've mentioned this before. Several years ago, we as Adventists didn't have an organization. And
Mm-hmm.
so I started the Adventist Agricultural Association. I remember I contacted, over 1,000 different people, and I kind of gave them my idea. And so after I started it, one of the very first things we did was we looked at the Back to Eden garden. There were guys who have done it who have been gardening for 60 years. The problem with Back to Eden is, and if you know anything about wood chips need nitrogen to break down. And there have been people in this area that we've actually had to go. There was a guy, I think in Greenville, Tennessee, that a good friend of mine, he brought in truckloads of wood chips and just dumped it all over his field. He had a big, massive field. And what we ended up doing is going up there, renting a bobcat, scraping all of those wood chips off, putting them in a pile, and we told him to compost that for 2 years, let it all break down. So in this area, what the guy doesn't tell you, 2 things. The soil in Washington has high volcanic rock, and it has a higher electric. We have to be careful with this. We don't want to go into New Age. Ellen White actually makes a statement 3 times. She says it's the energy in the soil that makes the seed grow. Right. I don't know what that means. I'll ask Jesus someday. I'm not going to be one of these people go out and try to figure it out and go down some dark path. I figure if Jesus didn't tell us, I'll wait till I get there and I'll ask him. But she says it's the energy in the soil that makes the seed grow. Mm-hmm. So Washington State, the soil, the energy levels, the U.S. Forestry Division have actually tested it, and it's extremely high. So the higher the soil energy, we do know this, the easier it is to grow. And for whatever reason, the southern soils have lower energy than the northern and the western, whatever that means. When you put wood chips on there, you need a higher energy level in that soil to break it down. You need higher microorganism activity, and you need calcium. We are short in all three. When you do it, it depletes a little bit of nitrogen that you have in this area.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what is that noise?
Sorry, it's an airplane.
Oh. So what we tell people is get the wood chips, put them aside, let them break down for a year or two, and then put it back on as compost. In this area, we need nitrogen and compost more than anything else. Wood chips do not do that. The benefit of wood chips is it helps you maintain moisture, but you can see you can do it different ways. You can use grass, you can use pine straw, you can use wheat straw like I have, because you need some covering. But the Back to Eden, I wrote an article on that, and one of the problems that I have with the method, Back to Eden, nothing died in Eden. For example, you didn't have dead wood chips all over the ground. So to say that you're going back to Eden is actually false. And I remember I was processing that one day, thinking about it. How is that taking us back? Eden didn't have death. So we're killing these trees, we're grinding them up, and we're getting all this wood chips, and then we're putting it on our garden. We're saying it's going back to Eden. That just didn't add up in my mind. The other thing that that guy doesn't mention is when he brings in his compost, go back and watch the videos. I contacted him, and he didn't contact me, but one of the other guys that I know have spoken with him. He takes the wood chips, he puts them in his chicken yard. And if you notice with the chickens, what I mentioned, chicken has the highest amount of nitrogen of any of the animals. Chicken, rabbit, goat, cow, horse. And so all that nitrogen is in the wood chips. So when he's introducing it back into his already rich soil, he's introducing it with some nitrogen. What most people in this area were doing is they were just bringing the wood chips in and just dumping it on their garden and then depleting the soil.
Okay. Answers my question. Thank you.
Sorry, I know I get that a lot.
Do you have any thoughts on straw bale gardening?
Be a little bit more specific for people.
I was just looking into it last year, just because I've heard it's easy for weeding, it's just easy to maintain, and you don't need a specific area of soil. You can just put it anywhere.
So you're talking about growing in the straw bale, right?
Right on the straw bale. Yeah.
So the theory behind that, so straw has micronutrients, right? Pine straw, because it was once living. So the theory behind that is if you plant in it, your plant is going to basically have straw will eventually break down, but it has a place to burrow its roots, and it has it's able to draw its micronutrients out of the straw. The problem with that is it's hit and miss. There are people who have really good success with it, and there are people who don't, because it depends where that straw comes from. Also, in this area, and I've checked, I've actually had a lot of calls. It's extremely difficult to source straw, meaning get straw in this area that isn't treated with pesticides and fungicides and all kinds of chemicals. So by growing in that, guess what? Your plants are mining into the plant. And so in theory, it's a good thing, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it. If anything, I would say just use the straw. The big thing is weeds, but I would say use something to suppress the weeds. Again, you know, bag your grass when you mow your lawn, bag it and use that as weed suppression. Get out there, don't be afraid to get some work. You know, what's fascinating to me, I remember I was speaking somewhere and it just dawned on me. We as Americans are willing to spend $50, $60, $70 a month to go and pay for a membership to work out and sweat. But we don't want to go out in our backyard, pick up a hoe for free and work and sweat. It's fascinating to me. So I say get your exercise, save the 50 to 70 bucks, and go in your backyard and, you know, use the hoe.
Hey, I want some kimbap. Your daughter is eating sushi in the back.
That's true. I know, she's eating sushi.
Thank you. That answers. Yeah, that's good to know.
Any other questions? Jason. Okay, Jason's. I didn't see any squash on your charts. Not on that one. I had squash. I do have squash. It wasn't on that one. Squash takes a long time, and you need a large area to grow squash. Those things will run everywhere. And so you just want to pick an area. I often wondered, I don't know, down south, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but when they plant squash, they kind of make a little hill, plant it. And I often wondered why they did that. But one year I planted squash without doing it, and I couldn't find the base of the plant. I'm like, where does one plant start and one end? So in my mind, at least, I think the theory they do that is you can know where the base of each plant is if you wanted to do, if you needed to find that for whatever reason. But yeah, we do a lot of squash, Jason. You're welcome, Satiro. Have a good one. Any other questions? Nobody? Do you guys want to do another one of these, or you think this is good? Have you answered all your questions, or don't know?
Are you sharing your chart?
Do you want me to? What specifically do you want me to share?
I don't know. Just to know how, like, the different crops and how long it takes and when you should plant and, everything you had on your chart. Or
Okay.
something similar.
Okay, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'll put them up on my website, the Garden Steward. Give me a few days. I'll try to get them up there. It really, I did that for the benefit of people. It has good resources for books. It has good place to get seeds. The 2 articles, the newsletters that we did has, some good information. And then what I'll do is I'll put these charts up there so that you can go and have access to them.
Okay. I might have missed that at the beginning. I had to step out.
Okay, so thegardensteward.com is my website. I haven't done anything in several years on it, but it has a lot of information on there. I think I did post that in here. Let me see. Yeah, I'll post it again in the, I'm sorry, for everyone. There, thegardensteward.com. And if you go there, and it talks, the article that I mentioned has good information as far as starting points. It has start small, and it talks about the Keeping the Food Journal. It also talks about, economy of scale, how to figure out how much space you need to grow, and talks about staggering. Instead of planting everything at the same time, stagger it. That way you can enjoy it all summer long, and you're not using large spaces just for one crop. You can get many crops in there, and just keep, like for cucumbers. Last year we planted 300 cucumbers, and we had cucumbers coming out of our ears. And so this year what we're going to do is I think I'll just plant 100 of them. And then when they start dying back, just pull them out, start with a fresh crop. And so that we have cucumbers going. I may not pull all of them out, or I may start it in a second area. Cucumbers tend to have, diseases. So sometimes it's better to start them in another area than in the same area.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Hey, Daniel, one year I planted cucumbers, not
Mhm.
cucumber, carrots
Okay.
in the fall,
Uh-huh.
and I kind of let it pass the winter.
Okay.
And the following spring, they were not big. They were kind of small, but they were so sweet and so crunchy. And then, so I think you said earlier that you plant in August, July or August?
August. Cucumbers,
August.
probably August, September. Oh,
Okay.
Carrots, right? I'm sorry.
Carrots.
Yeah, carrots. Late August, September. Yeah.
Okay. So you said you cover it during the winter?
Okay, so you remember the covering that I had over my caterpillar tunnel? The caterpillar.
So then can you plant it inside of the greenhouse and leave it the whole winter?
Carrots like a little bit of cold, and honestly, you don't have to cover carrots. Greenhouses, and I know this firsthand, in the wintertime, my greenhouse would get up to 95 degrees, but at night, a greenhouse usually stays about 5 degrees warmer than outside.
Warmer.
So if it's
Yeah.
20 degrees outside, it's going to be 25 in that greenhouse. And what plants don't like is a massive fluctuation. So and when you have such a large, it's not good for them. Now carrots will do fine. I didn't bother covering my carrots unless it was getting lower than say about 30 degrees. They can handle a little bit of frost. It's not, especially if they're mature. But if it was dropping down into, you know, the 20s, then what I would do is I would go out. And I was going to say, remember the cover that I had over my caterpillar tunnel?
Yeah.
Breathable material. We would go out there and we would just set stuff down and we would lay that over because I had a massive area. But if you have a small area, a sheet will do. Just go to the thrift store and, you know, get a used sheet or whatever, and put paint cans down, whatever, put sticks, you know, in the ground, just something so the sheet will not fall on top of the, you know, the carrot, but just keep it propped up. And you can, you know, that's a good way to help keep just a little bit of insulation in there for the carrots to be okay. But carrots will survive. I've had carrots uncovered down to 29 degrees and it didn't bother them.
So I had grown carrots in Texas, which doesn't get very cold.
Right.
And so that's why the next year they didn't grow that much. They stayed small, but they were extremely sweet and crunchy, and I loved it. Yeah.
Yeah, we had carrots are one of those things that they like a loose soil. So if you have an area that's heavy clay, I would highly, highly encourage you to mix some sand in there, get some sand in there. So because carrots is a root and they like to dig. Now, Susan, you like daikon. One year I went and I bought 50 pounds of daikon radishes and I just seeded my entire 24 by 178 field in that. And daikons are they will burrow in the hardest ground. And when you till it in, it puts nutritional value. It gives you you know, beneficial bacteria. It does loosen that soil up for you, and it does give you organic matter.
Really?
Yes, it really does. So they are a good cover crop. I used it as a cover crop, but we like them, so we harvest tons of them.
Right.
But I mean, you know, 50 pounds was a lot of daikon radishes.
It is. Last year, my parents planted daikons. It's Korean daikons. They're more round and big.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with that.
Huge. Well, we put it in kimchi, you know. But somehow last year, I don't know if it's because of the weather was so hot that, you know, normally they last quite a while if you cover it up really well. I mean, after harvesting it, we put it in the refrigerator. This last year, I mean, normally it lasts like 3 months without having any air inside or getting rotten or anything. Last year, within a month, it started rotting and it got really bad. It got air inside. And I don't know if the weather related or not, but it was really weird last year. Even the cabbages, the Napa cabbage did not survive well. I mean, I don't know what it is.
In your garden?
Yeah, my parents' garden in Benton.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to. That's kind of tough.
Yeah, it never happened to them, and they were surprised. They're like, "What's wrong with this daikons? It just didn't do well." I mean, it got big and it looked good, but within like a month, it was rotting and got air inside, and it was just, I don't know. It was really weird.
Then I guess I should mention daikon radishes. There's different varieties. It's you know, they're really neat. The neat thing about them is you can eat them raw, you can cook them, you can fry them, you can bake them, you can boil them, put them in soups.
Yeah.
But they make a really good, you know, if you have an area that's really hard, and let's say you're not going to grow, you know, you want to do something over the winter, not grow anything in the winter time, you can just go and get some daikon radish seeds, Google them online, and just plant them, cast them all over that area, and just let them. They will dig deep. I mean, I had Daikon radishes that, I kid you not, over a foot long, and you know, 2 inches in diameter.
Yeah, those are Japanese daikons.
Yeah.
We call it Japanese daikon. So you just let it grow and then you just till it next year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Eat a few of them on the way though, but
Yeah.
that's all we do. We eat as many as we want, and then next spring we just go and till that in, and it really just revitalizes that soil.
Wow, that's good to know.
Yeah, they are a good cover crop.
Okay, good.
Oh.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, let's have a word of prayer. If you guys want to do something like this again, let me know. You
Sure.
can always shoot me an email. If I can answer a question, I'm more than willing to. Yeah, I guess, no, yeah, it's time to go, so let's pray. Father, we just want to pause. Thank you for this opportunity, and Lord, thank you so much that we can see you in the garden. There's so much of you, and the more we play in the dirt, Lord, the more your characters reveal to us. I want to pray for everybody here, help them to have good gardens, and Lord, you've wanted us to do that from the beginning, and you say that we'll even do it again when we get to heaven, so help us to start practicing in between. I pray a blessing for everybody on here, and help us to have a good, productive week. In Jesus' name we ask. Amen.